So, here's what happened. I woke up today and my laptop decided to have a random stupid problem. So I decided, you know what, I have a recent backup. I'm just gonna restore it. I can't deal with this right now. And I start to restore, and it turns out the restore is going to take 12 hours. I am angry and I need something to do. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go over my Goodreads list. We're going to go over every single book I've read this year, and we're going to rant about them. Even the 5-star ones. We're going to rant about all of them. You know what? This video is not the video we deserve, but it is the video we need. You know it's gonna be shit when I don't have any of my lights set up. I even have tea. All this tea is gonna be spilled by the end of this video. Metaphorically. So we're going to start from the latest and go back from there. I don't even remember what I read this year. It's gonna be around 50 books I read. So I don't know how long this video is going to be, but what I know is it's not gonna be good. All right, let's start with The Subtle Knife. His Dark Materials. I read this to catch up before the second season of the TV show. I do book versus TV videos for each episode. I did for the first season too. So I really love this series, but the second book suffers from the middle book syndrome. There are a lot of things that happen that don't make sense at all, especially towards the ending. Like something that's really major that's been going on gets resolved in the most unsatisfying way. Someone random comes out of nowhere and kills someone, and then someone else dies in a pointless way because they forget to do something. But the worst thing is, in the first book, Lyra was a fantastic protagonist. But in the second book, we kind of lose that. Lyra sort of takes a backseat for Will. Now, the TV show introduced Will in the first season, but the book doesn't introduce Will in the first book. It just waits until the second book. So when you start the second book, you're suddenly with this different kid. Anyway, he plays a much bigger part in this story, and I don't think he is as interesting as Lyra. And I think Lyra suffers from Will taking the driver's seat for this book. The thing is, it got worse in this reread because when you first read this book, it's just super interesting because it just introduces this incredible concept of traveling between universes. But in a reread, you start noticing all the nonsensical things. So I actually ended up giving this book 3 stars, which is pretty low for the series because I like the series quite a bit. Moving on to the next book, The Language of Thorns by Lee Bardugo. This is a short story book in the Grishaverse. This is like a super pretty book. I have the ebook, so I'm not affected by the pretty design of it. The stories are just incredibly random. They're just so random. These are supposed to be stories Grisha kids read, but they barely have anything to do with that world. They're kind of closer to our world. There's like a story like Hansel and Gretel. There's like a story like The Little Mermaid, that kind of thing. There was only one fairy tale that was maybe somehow related to Grishaverse in the future. I don't know, because there was like a different magic system in that story. But other than that, I don't think there's anything redeemable about this. I gave it 2 stars. The next book is another short story book in the Grishaverse. That's The Lives of Saints. This is a recent book. I have a full review of this on the channel. It's super pretty. It's right over there. I'm just too lazy to get up and take it right now, but the book is in the review if you'd like to check it out. This suffers from a similar thing as the previous one. The stories themselves are just not very interesting. They're super short. They're even shorter. It does give some insight on the Grisha world, so in that sense, it is kind of okay. These are supposed to be stories about saints of the world. So saints are actually Grisha. But back then, people didn't know about Grisha abilities. So because they performed these magical abilities, people were afraid of them or whatever. So, moral tales on why not to treat Grisha badly. I give it 3 stars, but it's not worth your time if you're not a Grisha super fan. The next one is The Invisible Life of Adileru. This is one of the most hyped books of this year, and I did not like it. I gave it 3 stars because it's competently written, but just nothing happens. The whole book, there is no plot. It's just this random girl going through her life. So she's immortal. This book takes place over 300 years. But like nobody remembers her. So that's the catch. But like the problem is like until the last 20% of this book, there really is no story to latch onto. It's sort of like her diary, which is what it's meant to feel like. But I got incredibly bored. I have a full review if you want to check it out. It is somewhere on the channel. The next book is Prenicy by Susanna Clark. This is also like pretty hyped up book. There is very little information on this book though. I could have done a full review, but I did not. So this book is quite short, quite interesting. It takes place in a strange intermediate world type of place. Like it's like a really large house or something. And you're directly dumped into this random person's point of view. It's super confusing in the beginning and you're like, what is happening? And you need to give quite a bit of time so that the book catches you up on the things that are actually happening. Because like the first 40% of the book is this random guy doing random things. He's like going fishing and like there's like a bird and they're like skeletons of dead people and he just like takes care of them. And then he meets with this like random mysterious asshole. Once it gets going and you understand what's happening, it is kind of interesting. But to get there is just like a lot of work. I got super bored in the beginning. The only reason I continued was I just didn't have anything to do and it was short. Moving on to Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. This is again one of the most hyped books of this year. Christopher Paolini wrote this book 10 years after Aragon. I think this is the first book he published. It is sci-fi. It is bad. It is filled with cliches. I do have a full rant review on this, so I can't really rant any more about it. But like from the writing style to the plot to the characters, everything is just incredibly cliche. Through and through, I found it so silly. There were like sound effects like boom, bam, bam, psst, for explosions and weapons. I found it super silly, and I found the main character incredibly bland. This is a single point of view book, so you don't get any other characters. You're stuck with her. Nothing really had consequence. Everything was so random. They just went from one fetch quest to the other with like no actual consequence. They would just get waves of enemies, attack them at the end of each of them. It felt like everything was just to make the book longer, and long it is. I was expecting a lot from this book because I do like Christopher Paolini. He's smart and fun on his YouTube channel, but this book was just not for me. The next one is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. I only read Beartown by Frederick Bachman and it was fantastic, but it was sad. I don't want to be sad. I'm already sad, but this book is thankfully a comedy. So the whole plot is there's a bank robbery and the robber takes hostages and the police interferes and they're questioning the hostages, but the robber is nowhere to be found. The problem is the characters are so much caricatures of actual people. The dialogues they have with the police would just never ever happen in real life. They're just too silly. Now, I get that it's supposed to be absurdist, but it took me out of it quite a bit. But if you go along with it, it is kind of funny. So I was actually going to give this a much lower rating, but like as you get to the ending, Frederick Bachman does the thing he does where like sort of pours his soul into the story and then you just can't help but feel it. It's just ends so beautifully. I can't even rant about it. Yeah, but you have to like accept that humor is just absurd. Let's move on. Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the second book of Stormlight Archive. I gave this 5 stars, but I can rant about it. What I'm gonna rant about it is, I'm not sure, but there seems to be a love triangle being formed in the story, and it's so stupid. It should not happen. It makes no sense at all. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why it's in here at all. It just feels like Sanderson just wanted to put a love triangle in the story, and he did. It doesn't work. It's making me angry, and it's not in this book. It's not actually happening. But I feel like it is being set up. I feel like it is going to happen. I don't want it. I haven't read Oathbringer yet. I will probably start reading it today because I have nothing else to do for 12 hours. Hopefully I will read like 10% of Oathbringer because it's like 1200 pages. But I don't want that to happen, and it's going to happen. I am so angry. End of rant. The next one on the list is This Is How You Lose the Time War. Incredibly hyped book. Everyone loves it. I hated it. It makes no sense. Nothing that happens in this book makes any sense. Listen, it is written competently. It is written beautifully. I agree. But everything that happens in the world is just so random. You're just given so little information. I have no idea what the hell is happening in this whole world. Like, I don't even know what the time war is. I don't even know what we're winning, what we're losing. I don't know what the missions are these people are going. They're just so random. It is very interesting, but the plot doesn't make sense. You cannot convince me otherwise. The next one is The Space Between Worlds. This is again another book that I was really excited about. In the blurb, it's told like this main character has a pretty special thing going on. The travel between parallel universes is possible as long as your counterpart is dead. The thing about the main character is her counterparts have been dying in many of these parallel universes, so she can travel to over 370 parallel universes. And I'm like, oh wow, that sounds super interesting. It brings all sorts of questions, like why are her other selves are dying? Like there can be so many interesting answers to that. But like, guess what? None of that actually matters. And this primary rule where you cannot travel to another parallel universe where your counterpart is still living is also BS. That actually doesn't mean anything. That sort of gets thrown away pretty early on in the book. And also, she is not a special person. She's just like a regular, super low-level traveler. And also, like, these travels don't really mean much. They don't really do anything in these travels. They're just like going surveying, coming back. It's just so boring. So most of this book basically takes place in one parallel universe, and they're like trying to save the people in that parallel universe. So it was just a shell of what I thought this book was going to be. I got bored, gave it 2 stars. The next one on the list is Luster by Raven Lailani. This is a debut book and it is super hyped, got lots of fantastic reviews. It is a good book. I can't really, it's hard to rant about it. What I'm going to say is, it's just too real. I said before, I'm already sad. I don't need books that make me sadder. So it's about this young girl working in a publishing company and she gets in a relationship with an older married man. It's a lot about sexuality and racial politics. I want to rant about it. I can't really rant about this one, I guess. It's really sad. It just left something upsetting in me, which is not what I want when I read the book. The next one on the list is Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. This is the next book on the Twilight franchise. This is basically the first book written through Edward's point of view. I have a full review of that if you'd like to check it out. I also have a video where I recreated this cover. Those are fun. And my review is basically a rant video, but like this book is just so incredibly long, first of all. And the second of all, it just ruins Edward. I never thought Edward was like an asshole. I thought maybe he was being mature because he is much older. But like, because you hear all his thoughts in this book, you see that he's seeing all those high school kids as his rivals and like making lots of condescending comments on them. He's incredibly possessive of Bella. He's incredibly manipulative. So this basically ruined Edward for me. It is exhausting how long everything takes in this book. I didn't like it. I have an extensive review if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it. The next one is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, but the comic. This comic is actually fucking fantastic. It's the only thing I can rant about is that this is out of print. They only made 4 issues. This is like a fantastic summary of the book. It hits all the important beats. The art is fantastic, but unfortunately, as humans, we don't deserve good things. So I guess this didn't sell and they canceled it, but it's a fantastic comic. If you can find it, read it. I could only find it digitally. So if you're a fan of the books, you should check this comic out, but if not, just read the book. Moving on, The Actual Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. Listen, I really like this book. The characters are fantastic. There's incredible humor, but the plot is just non-existent. I just felt so aimless while reading this. I enjoyed the reading experience. It just lacked in the plot department so much. It will probably be difficult for people to get into this. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if people just stopped reading it early on. But it's just this fantastic dialogue writing and fantastic character writing. I kept reading and I enjoyed my experience, but like, even though I finished it and even though I liked it a lot, I gave it 4 stars. I'm not super curious about the second book because like, I don't care about what happens. I don't know what to expect. It's just too general for me. But, you know, at some point I will read the second book because the craft of character writing was just so strong. Moving on, Home Before Dark. I enjoyed this book quite a lot. I read it in like a day or two, but like here's the thing, it's not like a fantastic, life-changing writing or anything like that, but it's just like fun. It's fun, it's kind of dumb. This girl inherits the haunted house they used to live in, and her father wrote a book about their experience while they were living in that haunted house. It's like a super famous book. So basically, you're going through her point of view and that book's point of view. So her father passes away, and she's trying to solve the mystery of the secret book. She thinks it's all bullshit, so she goes back to the house, but is it all bullshit or was it actually haunted? The characters are just like super thin. They're like paper thin. There's no complexity. Their relationships too. It's not scary. If you like scary books, this is not scary, but like it's spooky. So I probably should have talked about this as like a Halloween recommendation. But anyway, moving on. The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I like this book. I gave it 5 stars, but I'm gonna say this book has 2 prologues and 1 full start. It drove me insane because I read the first prologue and I was like, oh, like this is kind of interesting. I would like to read about it. And then the second prologue came and it was just something completely different. But I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting too. I can read that maybe. But then the first chapter just jumps to something completely different and it was still mildly interesting. I would still read it. But then after that, it just jumps to something completely different too. It's just so annoying. Starting this book is so difficult. And then like the 30% of setup, nothing happens. The main character just sitting in a cage and like sulking the whole thing. It was exhausting. Thankfully, after that, it picks up and then just goes from there. But boy, that first 30% was difficult. Moving on to Axios and by Lindsay Ellis. Again, I have a full review of this one too. What I would rant about this is first the character. It's just the character was just too bland for me. And the second thing is just there is a significant difference between the first part of this book and the second part of this book. I think that transition is just too jarring. I think if you like the first part of this book, you won't like the second part of it. And if you like the second part of it, you won't like the first part of it. I kind of enjoyed the second part a little bit more because it felt like that's what the author wanted to write. It's sort of like a monster romance story. But like the first book is just all dialogue exposition, just random world building exposition through dialogue between the character and the alien. So the story is supposed to be there's this random character who's assigned as the interpreter for the alien's first contact. It's just a little bit too random, but that's what happens. Anyway, I already have a full review if you want to hear more about this one. The next one is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Everyone loves this book. I hated it. I got so bored. I can't tell you how bored I was. Literally, nothing happens in this book until the last 30%. The whole first part of this book is just everyone is just sulking and being like super upset and angry. So she's sent to check up on her cousin because she's like sick or something, and then she comes to this weird Gothic nice house, and then mysterious things start happening in this house. It's like things are crawling through the walls, or like she's having dreams or stuff like that. She goes to see a doctor several times, and then there's this one guy kind of helps her, but like he has zero personality. His whole personality is just he's brooding. Like I understand the atmosphere is great, whatever. Yeah, in Gothic horror, the atmosphere is important. This book has atmosphere, but the characters are just too bland, and the plot basically non-existent. Nothing is moving forward until the last 30% when like you start understanding, oh, like this is what's happening kind of thing. So I'm probably wrong. This book was already picked up and it's being adapted right now for TV, I think. And everyone loves it. It's everyone's favorite 5-star book. I don't get it. The next one is The Name of the Wind by Pat Rothfuss. This is a super famous book. Third book of the series is never coming out. I read this accepting that fact. I was like, okay, the third book is never gonna come. He's never gonna write that book. He's not gonna finish it. I will be content with just reading the existing books. So I read this. It is a great book, but like the main character Quoth, oh my god, he's just so insufferable. He's just incredibly self-centered, and he is just too good at everything he does. That's just not interesting as a character for me. He's just too good at everything. Any random thing he does, he is good at. I just need one small thing that one person is better than quote. It doesn't exist. So I guess he is right to be cocky. When you're good at everything, you can be cocky, I guess. And he does struggle, but I just don't like people who are just good at everything. It's everything. And I haven't read the second book yet, but I keep hearing how good he is in like sexual technique. I can already see how annoyed I'm gonna get with that. But whatever, let's move on. The next one is His and Hers by Alice Feeney. This is another book I really liked, actually. I gave it 4 stars. This is like so much fun. It's like there's twists coming all around, twist after twist after twist after twist. I'm not like a huge fan of unreliable narrators because it feels a little bit odd that when you're in a character's head and they're like hiding information from you. But this didn't feel like it was taking itself too seriously. It felt like it was having fun with it. I do have a full review of it if you want to check it out. But again, if I want to rant about it, I think this is it's gonna be the characters because it didn't feel like they had more life outside of the story. And some of the twists are like a bit forced. But overall, I had fun reading this book. The next one is A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne Brown. This is another book that everyone loved, but I kind of hated. And the reason is because everything is so random in this book. It's just things just happen randomly. They're just like in a fair in a place. They're just like walking around. Suddenly, rah, demon kidnaps, demon demands something, and then you have to do that thing to save that person. And he goes somewhere to do that thing, and then suddenly, like a random god selects him as his champion, and he suddenly needs to compete in this weird contest. It's just everything is too random. Now, in real life, things can happen by coincidence, but in books, they can't. In books, I need things to happen as results of character action. I can't just have random things happening. At some point, like characters are standing and like talking to each other, and suddenly, assassin! Look, where did this come from? It's just too random, and everything is random in this book. So I don't like it. Everyone loves it. I do appreciate an interesting setting. It has an interesting setting. Thankfully, it's not medieval European. Otherwise, I would have given it a much lower score. But still, let's move on. Dead House Gates by Steven Erikson. This is the second book of Malazan, Book of the Fallen. My main problem with Malazan books is that character voice is non-existent. Steven Erikson disagrees. I do think the characters have interesting backstories, and I do think the story itself is interesting, and it takes place in this vast, incredible world, but like every character feels like the author's voice to me. So I can never quite get into these books. It's just so much all over the place, and there are just so many characters, and there's just so many things happening. I can't really generalize it, like, because there are characters that I do like, and there were parts of the story that were a little bit more interesting than the rest. But I still don't know if I will continue reading this series or not. I have a love-hate relationship with the Malazan series generally. The next one on the list is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. I have a full review of that too. I don't know if I can rant about anything. I think if I wanted to rant about something, it's just the terminology can get super confusing. I'm not quite sure about all the noble titles. Also, the side characters are just not fleshed out enough. They all feel like they're just like there to give information to the main character. Especially one of the super important characters. She's sort of a love interest for the main character, I think. But her whole purpose in this book is to give exposition to the main character. And I think the book just didn't do justice to that character. I think the book could have done much more with that character. I am excited about the second book though. I really hope it turns out well. I will be sad if it's not. The next book on the list is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the next book in the Hunger Games franchise. I hated it. I already have a rant review on the channel. Who asked for Coriolanus Snow's backstory? I have no idea. I don't think there's anything redeemable about him. I don't think anything is justifiable about his actions. But also, like, what this book does is just it gives lots of unnecessary, pointless backstory. Like, oh, have you ever wondered how they came up with the idea of a scoreboard for the games? And I'm like, no shit, like there are games and there's a scoreboard. That kind of thing does not need explanation. Oh, have you ever thought how they came up with the idea that there should be betting in the games? I mean, there's betting in every sports game. Like, it's not a super complex idea. And also, it's not super interesting. They were like it's basically like Coriolanus Snow just throws out the idea of, oh, like, how about we have this and how about we have that? And then they have it. I don't know, I thought this book was incredibly pointless. I see people that like this book and I am confused, but they are making a movie adaptation. Of course, they're gonna milk this and they're gonna make tons of money. I don't know. I'll probably watch it too, whatever. The next one on the list is Network Effect by Martha Wells. This is the 5th book in the Murderbot Diaries, which I love. I love Murderbot Diaries. I started reading that series this year. I heard Pat Rothfuss recommend it somewhere, and I was like, I guess he knows what he's talking about. It is fantastic. I love the series, but it just lacks in the plot department so much. There's no overarching story. The same thing happens over and over again in every single book, and it happens in this book too. And it is sad. It also lacks a strong antagonist, and I doubt that it will be able to find those things in the next books. But you know, this will be a great like episodic TV show. Again, I love it, but it lacks in the plot department. The next book is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I had such high expectations for this book. It has such a funny title. So I was expecting this housewife book club fighting vampires. It's like Desperate Housewives meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I was so excited for it. Unfortunately, it's none of those things. It's not even funny. It was quite like depressing, and there are like lots of trigger warnings, so be careful before reading this. I already have a full review of that. Check that out if you'd like, but I was disappointed. The next one is Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This book is marketed as like group of dregs saving the universe type of thing, but they're not dregs, okay? Everyone is like super good looking, everyone is like super smart, they're super good at what they're doing. There's only one character. That character is kind of interesting, but all the others are far from being dregs. Like, my method of detecting if someone is a dreg or not is, would you like to be in place of this character if you lived in this universe? And I think I would be comfortable being in any of these characters' shoes if I lived in this universe, except for that one character. And unfortunately, that one character doesn't get enough time in this book. So I don't know if I'll be reading the next book, probably not. The next book on the list is Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. Everyone is crazy about the magic system in this book, but I absolutely hated it. I do not like pseudoscience. I'm fine if you say, you know what? It can fly because of magic. Fine. Magic makes you fly, no problem. But if you try to explain it with like a pseudo-scientific gravity theory, that's where you lose me. And a lot of things in this book are explained in that sort of pseudo-scientific way. So I could never really get into this book. I don't think I'll read the second book because of that, because to me, that's like a really fundamental thing about the writer's style. The next one on the list is Dune. I read Dune for the first time this year, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars, but I think one thing I can rant about is the head hopping. It's sometimes difficult to tell which character is speaking because just it shifts so fast between characters, and that's sometimes a little bit jarring. And sometimes it kills the tension of the situation a little bit because you know what everyone's thinking. The next one on the list is King of Scars. This is sort of the last major book in the Grishaverse, and this is my least favorite book, mainly because it undoes things that happen in the original trilogy. I really hate it when a book undermines the original trilogy and sort of like rewrites it. Oh, you thought that's what happened? No, that's not what happened. This is what happened. I really hated the ending of King of Scars. I think it was terrible. I know it's sort of divisive between people. I'm not gonna spoil it. I do have a full review of it with some spoilers about the ending. So if you'd like to check that out, go check that out. In that review, I can rant freely. So if you like to rant about it too, join me in that video. The next ones are the Murderbot Diaries novellas, All Systems Red, Artificial Condition, Rogue Protocol, and Exit Strategy. As I said, I loved Murderbot. I think this is a fantastic series. It's an amazing character. But as I said, it suffers from a lack of a strong plot. Pretty much the same thing happens in all the books. Murderbot gets hired, its client get into trouble, and then it saves the day. And you know, there's also the lack of a strong antagonist. The next book is The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. This is one of those books that promises something it actually doesn't deliver in the final book. The blurb is super interesting. It says like there's this girl who's going to be sacrificed to this god, but then a powerful wizard comes and says like, hey, I mean, How about you don't get sacrificed, but you work for me? And that's super interesting, but that's like happens at the very beginning of the book, and it happens in the least satisfying way. Like it's sort of a completely random encounter. She doesn't have anything special going on. She's really not able to do anything particular for this character. There's nothing particularly compelling happening for the wizard as well. I thought this was like a perfect example of a great outline executed badly. But I do have a full review of that too. The next one on the list is The Diviners by Libba Bray. Everyone loves this series. I got extremely bored. I just didn't understand what was at stakes. There's this mustache twirling super evil antagonist that's gonna take over the world, but I don't know what happens when he takes over the world. So it's sort of like this vague threat that's happening and they're just trying to save the world from it. And I didn't find the antagonist himself complex enough either. I got super bored. I thought it was so long too. I don't think I'll be able to read the rest of the books, but I mean, the main character is kind of fun, so maybe people like it because of that. I don't know. I didn't like it, but there's a full review if you want to hear more. The next one is Throne of Glass. Yes, I read Throne of Glass this year. This was my first and probably the last Sarah J. Maas books. I know I'm not in the intended audience for this book, but I just don't think this was written competently craft-wise. There's just too much telling about what the character is, how fantastic, amazing she is. And then there's this lame random competition, which is completely unnecessary, especially because all of the other assassins are like incredibly incompetent. But there is a full review if you want to hear more ranting. I did not like it. The next series is the truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. I have a review for each of these books, but basically my main problem was that in a detective story, I want the character of the detective to have some sort of particular thing for themselves. Like, Sherlock Holmes has his own thing, right? It's interesting to see him solve crimes because he has that interesting thing. And this character is just like a random teenager, so it wasn't really interesting to see her solve anything. Another thing is the book takes place in two different timelines. So you read the timeline where the crime took place, which is like 100 years ago, and then the timeline of the main character. But because you read the timeline where the crime took place, you're always a few steps ahead of the main character. So it always feels like she's just trying to catch up to you, which I didn't think was fun. The next one on the list is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a great book. It's incredibly original. But my problem was at some point in this book, there is like a random relationship and then like they have a kid or something. And that part just felt so random and so out of place, and it completely slows down the book and it completely changes what was happening in the book. There's a huge time jump. The book just lost me at that place. But everything other than that is incredibly innovative and interesting and such a creative world building. But I just don't know if I'll be able to continue reading this because I was just quite lost at that one part. It just never was able to get me back into it, but we'll see. The next and the last one on the list, so this is the first book I read in 2020, is The Hero of Ages. This is the third book of Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I thought it was a good conclusion to the series. My main rant is Sazed. I love Sazed, but he was just so sulky the whole book. I understand. He is dealing with things that are important, but just because it's realistic doesn't make it fun to read. It was boring. I did not like it. It didn't make sense. It's just too much time spent on that one thing. Other than that, I do think it was a satisfying conclusion to the series. I gave it 4 stars, and that concludes my rants on every book I read this year so far. I was able to pass some time. I don't know. I think I took like a couple of hours filming this video. Nobody made it to the end. I don't blame you. This is a terrible video, and this video will probably take my average view duration way down, but this was the video I needed today. I filmed this video. I don't know. If you watched it, let me know what you think, and hopefully you will join me in some of my better videos in the future. So I apologize for this video full of negative energy. I hope I didn't go too hard on these books. I usually have more balanced reviews, so please go ahead and check those. But yeah, if you like to see more well-balanced critical reviews, that's mostly what this channel is about. If by any chance you actually like this video, please leave a like to let me know. Not that I'll do any more of these, but hopefully I'll see you in one of the next videos. So until next time.
I am complete. I am